Welcome everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Claire Buckerfield. I'm the ArtsFest coordinator for the University of Wolverhampton. Over the coming weeks we'll be hosting a series of ArtsFest Online events. Please visit our website or follow us on Instagram at WLV ArtsFest to keep up to date with those. Tonight we will be joining poet Liz Berry and artist Tom Hicks in conversation about their work and new collaboration. Our host this evening is Black country writer Kerry Hadley-Pryce. Over to you, Kerry.
Thanks very much, Claire, and welcome to everybody on this lockdown Zoom meeting of ours. I think if you ever wanted to invest in anything, Zoom was the thing to invest in, and we welcome you. I can't tell you how proud I am to be here with Liz Berry and Tom Hicks. And what we thought we'd do is just start by introducing ourselves and what we do, like you don't already know. Quickly, me, Kerry Hadley-Pryce. I write novels, basically, and short stories set in the Black Country. And we'll talk a bit about we'll talk quite a lot about the Black Country while we're here. I've got two novels, both by published by Salt. One called The Black Country and the other called Gamble. Hopefully there'll be another one out called God's Country. We'll talk some more about writing and process and things as the meeting wears on. So that's me. Let's hear from Tom. Perhaps you can introduce yourself, Tom, for those who don't know who you are. Tom Hicks, aka Black Country Type.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm Tom Hicks. I'm the photographer and artist behind Black Country Type. So this has been a project I've been working on over the last 3 years, really. And it's basically a typographic and urban exploration of the Black Country. Obviously I'll go into more details later on, but I started a few years ago just recording a few examples of signs and lettering in the Black Country, and it built up into a theme and then a project and then exhibitions. And as part of that, I got to speak to Liz, which has been great. And we're currently collaborating on a joint project where poetry and photography meet each other. I'll let Liz.
Yeah, and we'll talk quite a lot about how that process of yours works, Tom, because it's really, really interesting. And of course, we've got the lovely Liz Berry. Very proud to have her here with us today, a Black Country poet extraordinaire. Now, Liz, tell us a little bit about the publications that you've had, and we'll talk a little bit about process and stuff a little bit later. But tell us a bit, for those who don't know you, where have they been for a starter?
Oh, bless you. I'm Liz Berry and I'm a poet. Had two collections. The first was called Black Country. Lots of the poems explored the landscape and the people and the voices of the Black Country, and used lots of really beautiful Black Country dialect. And then a few years ago, I had a little pamphlet called the Republic of Motherhood, which also used little bits of some of that gorgeous Black Country language that I love.
Yes, you're very. I mean, that really is part of your thing, isn't it? But again, we'll come to the Black Country dialect and the language and the kind of musicality of that as we sort of progress. But we've got a very lovely PowerPoint that we hope will be sort of running alongside our talking. This is a PowerPoint to accompany this conversation, and it's one of Tom's some of your photographs, Tom. Now. If we can just talk a little bit about the Black Country. Tom, what is it about the Black Country then that does it for you?
Well, I suppose the first thing is that this is where I grew up, so I haven't got much choice but to be involved in it on some level. I think, obviously, you know, a lot of people when they're taking photographs, they'd like to go to sort of the Lake District or Hawaii, places like that. But I haven't really got those options. So, you know, I look at what's on my doorstep. So that's really how it started. So, but it's the layers of history for me, and the landscape, you know, it's like a countryside and an urban landscape all in one place. So yeah, there's a lot to go at. I mean, a lot of my stuff's urban, but there's kind of plant life within it and all sorts. So yeah.
Yes, I mean the Black Country itself, people often confuse with Birmingham, don't they? You know, they think that the Black Country is either part of Birmingham or, you know, or it's just a little town or something. And I think we like that idea, don't we? That really nobody's absolutely certain where it is. You might have an idea that it's for Wolverhampton and there's probably Dudley and, you know, those kinds of areas. But I think that there is this element of mystery about it that probably comes out in your photographs. There's a big sense of history, but also this, what happened with that? How did that come to be? When you take these photographs, are you sort of cognizant of that? Are you aware of that going on in your mind?
Well, yeah, I think it's a hard place to pin down. So, you know, if you try to find it on a map, I think Ordnance Survey a few years ago identified the Black Country on a map for the first time, but it was they only put letters, so it's a Black Country. So it's like, unless you live under those letters, the Black Country, there's no border on the map, which is still baffling, really. And there's lots of historical understandings of where the Black Country is, and none of them quite agree. It's also a place that people maybe see from the motorway or go past on the train. You can't get a grip of how it lies. So I like the idea of going to places that I've never been within the Black Country as well. There's places I've never been to. I've had no reason to go there, I suppose, but Willenhall and, you know, parts of Netherton, parts of West Bromwich that I just don't know. I know I've lived here all my life, but I've never been there in any detail. So it's almost like a closer examination, really.
Yeah, and we'll come back to how you get there and what you do in a minute, because one of the definitions actually of the Black Country academically is that the Black Country is wherever the dialect is spoken. And this sort of brings me then to Liz and your poetry, Liz, because we mentioned, didn't we, or you did rather, about the use of dialect, particularly in your anthology, Black Country. It's an odd thing, the dialect, isn't it? Because it's different whichever part of the region that you're in. How do you go about dealing with that in your poetry?
I'm just absolutely fascinated by dialect and kind of the richness of people's voices. Are you thinking about how I incorporate dialect into my work, Kerry?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose I'm a real sort of treasure hunter, so I love listening to people. I'm very nosy. I love kind of gathering language, but also I'm a great explorer. I love old books, dictionaries, oral recordings, and I love being able to sort of sometimes pluck a word out of the past or out of obscurity and then pop it into a poem. It feels almost like a really beautiful treasuring thing to do to a word, to put it into a poem or a song. It's like a way of passing that word forwards, keeping it alive. I suppose we saw it happen a lot with folk songs, didn't we? And I think a poem's got that same power as a song to carry a word forward into future mouths, future voices.
And it's interesting you should say that, because years ago I did some research into the dialect just to see whether or not it was still alive and well. And so I did some recordings of old elderly people in a care home and some recordings of children in a primary school. And it was really interesting, but it still was absolutely alive and well. I mean, and particularly in places, in sort of areas in Dudley in particular, where the children will correct you into Black Country dialect, which is great. Actually, I forgot to mention, and I should have done really, there's a capacity for anybody here that's watching to be able to ask questions. And just while we're on, we had one from Paul McAllister who says, is the Black Country a mindset rather than a place? What do you think?
Good idea, yeah, good concept. I think the thing about where it's spoken could, you know, there are pockets of the area which we wouldn't include in a map, you know, so like Stourport and even like Kimber and places like that, they're in different counties, and, you know, geographically you'd say, well, that's not you know, that's not in the Black Country, but it actually is.
Yeah. Well, it is, yeah. But
maybe even Rhyl and Benny and places like that. You know, the Welsh quarter of the Black Country.
Yeah. Well, this sort of links to that idea that if you take the dialect with you, then isn't it? You've taken a really important and rich part of it.
I was just going to mention language. What I like about both of you as writers is that you include the Black Country, but you don't milk it, if you know what I mean. You don't just every word's not just the Black Country. It's not like a parody of anything. It's just you use it when it's necessary or if the word's got a function.
Yeah.
You don't write in full dialect, so it becomes impenetrable to people who aren't from the area. And I think it's really clever that you both do that, really.
I think that's still so important, Tom. It's something I had to think a lot about when I first started writing using dialect. So as I wanted to do something really respectful with Black Country voices and Black Country dialects, often when we see vernacular writing, particularly Black Country speech used in sort of literature or written down, it's often to kind of take the mick out of people or to suggest people are uneducated or ineloquent. And I wanted to put it in poems, scatter it through poems, and kind of lift it up and say, look, it's this really, really beautiful language. It is eloquent. I don't want to mock it. I want to celebrate those voices. So that was a really conscious decision I had to make at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And I think what a lot of people think about the Black Country, especially the dialect, is they relate it to humour. Because, you know, and there is that, yes, of course, there is quite a lot of humour and a particular kind of humour when it comes to Black Country dialect. But I think with your poetry, Liz, the way that it comes across to me is it's more of a sensual kind of use of it, rather than this is hilarious, this is the way we talk around here, aren't we funny? And I think that's a really clever way of using the language that we've got. I mean, we'll talk about your process in a minute, but we're looking, aren't we, at this PowerPoint of Tom's with a selection of the pictures that you've taken, Tom. And what springs out is there's no people.
Yeah.
That's a conscious decision.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I think portraits of people and street photography are, you know, that involve people. It's a different medium, really. And there's something about the ethics of taking photographs of people in streets that, you know, I think sometimes people exploit that, really, and people, if they're not aware that they're having a photograph taken, I'm not quite sure about that. But I think the other reason that I don't include people is it's about people. Every photograph I take is about people's traces of people, really. How many photographs do you need of people to stand in front of something? Do you know what I mean? I think more the effect that people have on the landscape, really. There's something that I've come to quite recently, which is there's a group of photographers in America in the 70s, and it was called the New Topographics movement. It was basically about how photographers had sort of started to record man's encroachment into the American landscape, and some of it's quite similar to the work that I do, and I just didn't know much about it, really. But the main theme of it is man's kind of impact on an environment and people's marks that they make. So that includes something like the current slide, which is, you know, just a handmade sign, but graffiti or things people leave behind as well. So although they don't feature people, they're all pretty much about people or a space that someone's been in.
These are what academics call the spectres or the ghosts that are left behind in the kind of items that are left there, like the empty chairs, you know, or the bit of clothing or something. There's a story, isn't there, involved in that?
Yeah, and I might have an image that's just got, like, it might be a garage door and there might be a handprint scrawled across it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a person. It doesn't have to be them standing in front of it doing it. You know, it's just the suggestion of a person, really.
Yeah. And you're really, I mean, you and I, we've talked about this quite a lot, but this is a real kind of nudge against psychogeography, isn't it? This sort of sense of love of place in both cases in both Liz's poetry and in your pictures. If we just talk about your process, Tom, you know, how do you go about finding these actually amazing images? How do you go about it?
Well, the origins of it was almost like half joking, really. Ages ago, I used to be on Facebook, and I did a series of photographs of broken down doors in Wolverhampton, and I was basically indicating that at the end of the year I was going to release a calendar of it, Doorways of Wolverhampton. But it was kind of again, it was the same approach, but I just left it really and didn't do much with it. And then I came back to Instagram a few years ago, and the photographs seemed to fit that environment really well. And but the way I do it really is either by walking, so you know, in spare time just go on walks, but the main method is cycling. And really the good thing about cycling, and that works for me, is you can cover a big distance in a particular day. So you can explore. I can be in West Brom in, you know, like within the hour kind of thing. But the other thing being on a bike does, it means you can change direction at will. If you try going into a city centre on a bike, or you know, off Wolverhampton Ring Road, if you do it in the car, you can't stop and have a look at something. Whereas with a bike, you just pull it onto the pavement, and you don't have to worry about parking or paying a parking meter. You're just there. But the other thing it does, if there's areas that I'm drawn to, I can just explore it. And often the best photographs I've taken are of places where I've just shot past a street and thought, I've never been down there, I'm going to have a quick look. Obviously there's a lot of places I haven't been, but you get drawn to them. And it's the same with the idea of psychogeography, really, is that idea of exploring, noticing the feelings that you get in different parts of towns and cities. And some areas definitely kind of draw you in, and there's almost like a magnet there. You won't expect to have been there, but I end up coming out with about 4 or 5 photographs which I've used, you know. So it's just weird how you're drawn to places, but cycling gives that flexibility. Yes,
yeah. And Liz, your poetry also has this sort of sense of a love or a feeling, certainly, of place. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your process and about how you go about it? You know, how you go about deciding to write, or a poem, or what, you know, how you go about what the subject might be.
Normally, I think it starts with a feeling or a sort of curiosity about something. And we'll talk a bit more about how I work with Tom's photos later. But actually, I think it comes from that same impulse. It's sort of like a want to explore something or express something. And often I don't quite know what that is at the beginning. It starts in a really playful way. I do loads and loads of like free writing. I fill endless notebooks. I'm always scribbling down ideas, and I find out of that kind of mulch, that's where poems start to appear, and you find out what you're really curious about. But often I'm sort of drawn to something by a feeling or a mood or a story. That's often where it starts for me.
And it's interesting what you talk about free writing, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people who write or think they might want to write think that they can only put pen to paper, or, you know, fingers on a keyboard, if they've got the whole idea worked out in their head straight away. And of course, well, we both know that's not that's not how it works with writing. Is that there is an awful lot of, as you call it, mulch that just gets pushed to one side, or maybe used a little while later. Is it something that you have to do every day? Is it something that you think, well, you know, I need to keep, like an athlete, you know, I need to do something every day to make sure that I'm still on it? Or is it just as and when you feel like it?
No, I'd love to do it every day. And I go through periods of time in my life when I do write every single day, even just for sort of 5 minutes or so. Because I'm a big believer in just the practice, in keeping going, in writing and getting thoughts down, exploring things, and kind of writing for pleasure. That's how most of us start writing for sort of pleasure or release or play. And it feels so important to hold on to that, to sort of keep your process playful. Otherwise it would be so much pressure. If every time I sat down I thought, right, I'm just going to write a brilliant poem. Yeah. Oh, you'd never write anything, would you? It has to come from kind of a free place, a playful place, and just free writing or doodling around your notebook lifts all that pressure off. And I think that's when really great, exciting writing comes.
Yes, I agree. And I think that when it comes to poetry, or when it comes to writing, poetry is often considered to be probably the most difficult thing to be successful at. In terms of publishing, I'm talking about. I mean, I think, you know, any kind of publishing deal, if you like, is difficult to come by. But poetry is considered to be one of the most difficult things, really. How did you get to be so good?
Well, number one, by just writing like probably thousands of bad poems first, and then I wrote a decent one. I think so much of it, and this is the bit that people don't really talk so much about, is about building like a community of writers around you that supports and sustains you. And that starts from when you first start writing and you find a friend or you go to a workshop, right up until you're publishing and you're doing different projects. Because actually, for poetry, it's definitely not the money that will ever sustain you or the glory, but actually it's the company of other poets and hearing poems and helping other people on theirs and sharing it and discovering that's of the treasure of it, really, more so than kind of any external success that might come, which I always think is sort of quite fleeting anyway.
We must look on your passport, imagine. I was just going to say, you know, I've come across a similar thing, really. You know, I didn't train as a photographer, but what I've done along the way is met people who've been really supportive. You know, I started with Instagram just really as a place to put ideas, and then I got offered on the back of that a small exhibition in Birmingham. But initially, what I was going to do was go up there and literally blue tack pieces of paper to the wall. But I got chatting to my friend Sarah Zacharek, and she said, "You can't do that. You know, what's wrong with you?" Basically, one of her most favourite things in the world is putting exhibitions up, and she's good at maths as well, so she knows the distances between walls and all this. And you know, and along the way, I've met people and worked with people who've been supportive. So you don't just arrive at a place where, you know, you're having exhibitions, or, you know, people are signing up to listen to you.
Yeah.
Support networks and learning from other people is, you know, it's fantastic. And I found Instagram in particular quite a supportive atmosphere as well. So I've done little collaborations with people, but I think Liz's point about, you know, you don't just emerge from nowhere. You work with others, pick things up, improve if you can. But it's, you know, support's out there, isn't it?
It is, and I think it's a really important point that Liz made about this idea that you go into these creative arts, whatever it is, writing, poetry or whatever, or photography, out of enjoyment rather than out of kind of an ambition to be rich and famous, because good luck to you if that's the case. And it's really interesting what you say about this sort of, you know, being, I suppose, admitting that you are a poet, I am a poet, you're a poet, you know, I'm a writer and you're a photographer or an artist. And it's about admitting that and not being afraid to work alongside others, which brings us really beautifully, might I say, to the idea about collaboration. Tom, I think you've got another PowerPoint to show. While you're doing that, actually, we've got another question. We can just have a look at it. This one's from David Solo. He says, with respect to dialect, it feels different hearing Liz read her poems versus reading them on the page. How do you think, Liz? How does she think about the way dialect is presented in print versus verbally? That's a good question.
Well, I always think there's nothing like hearing a poet read their work to you live. It's a bit like hearing a band live rather than hearing a recording or, you know, listening to it at home. There's something special about the magic or the music of somebody's voice. But in terms of presenting dialect on the page, that's something I've thought a lot about and been really careful over. It's one of the reasons that the bottom of each of my poems, when it appears in a book, I always put a really tiny gloss or a glossary at the back to make it really easy for people to quickly sort of translate or identify a word if I think it's a lovely word for them to know or a useful word for them to know.
Yeah.
I suppose in my head I think I want to write about the Black Country and using its language, but in a way that makes it open and available to everybody.
Yeah.
So at least you can understand the meaning or have a guess at the pronunciation. But I do think there's nothing quite like the sort of the enchantment of a live reading and having somebody read the work or the poem to you.
And I think that is part of your, if you like that, your job as a poet, isn't it? I think to sort of perform it. Or to hear your voice, or to let people hear your voice say those things. So thanks for that, David. That was a good question. So collaboration then. Now, what is the background to this collaboration? Tell us a little bit about it. How did this come to be?
Do you want to talk about it first, Tom?
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah. I was just going to say about, you know, how you in your poems you highlight maybe a word and then give it a definition. Again, I think that leads back to the idea is you don't overdo it, but then, you know, you don't write full Black Country. But I think it's really useful because it's like a gentle way of introducing the language. So if you do that in your next few books, then, you know, people are steadily, particularly as they start to follow you, getting like a sneaky education. But the other thing I was going to say about language and dialect in the Black Country is there's lots of discussion about how foreign languages can say stuff in terms of feelings that the English language doesn't. You know, so like Norwegian, Scandinavian languages have words for things that we, you know, it's like, you know, when it's been a really hot day and the rain hits the tarmac, that smell you get, there's a word for it. And I think the Black Country does the same thing. It's just there's certain words that you need to get it out, and the Black Country's got some great words, like busted is one of my favourite. You know, instead of broken, it's busted.
Yeah.
But also what confuses me is you've got busted, which means broken, and then you got Boston, which is great.
Right. Yeah.
And how the two meet, you know, I find it fascinating. But
it is. Yeah. It is.
But going back to how it came about, I'd heard Liz on the radio. She was on Radio 6, talking to Chris Matthews about her poetry. I'd not really come across her books before, and I got in touch and said, "I'm working on these photographs. Would you like to have a look?" And it took a few backwards and forwards emails, and then what I did then was shared a batch with Liz, and she started to work on them. I mean, Liz has got access to all the photographs I've taken, but also stuff that I've never published as well. So it's almost like she's got an archive of stuff to work through. This is one of the first ones that I sent her. It was used, this is the back of a handwritten advert, but they'd obviously cut it out of something else. But yeah, so anyway, I sent Liz like a batch of photographs, and then we started just speaking via email, and we didn't meet for ages, probably about a year before we even got to meet each other. So again, it's like a remote kind of, but online kind of arrangement really. So yeah, it worked well.
And what did you think, Liz, when you had this nutter contacting you with
Kerry, it happens to me all the time, more than you would think.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Fellas with a soft spot for the Black Country. Yeah. As soon as I saw Tom's photos, I just loved them really. I was so enchanted by them. They've just got loads of lovely ingredients. I think they're really warm about the place. whilst being funny about it. In a way, you can only approach a place you're from or you know well, that kind of, you know, sort of poking fun at it in a way, but also being incredibly tender. And there was something kind of eerie and melancholy about them that I was really captured by. And I just finished the process of writing a pamphlet about new motherhood, and it was this really intense personal pamphlet, and actually the poems felt so hard to write. After I'd finished that, I just wanted to do something joyful and something that looked outwards rather than inwards. Yeah. And so there was a photo of Tom's, the one that you can see now, called Yam Yam's Diner. And that was the first one. It made me laugh because it's always been my like secret dream job. To be one of the ladies that works in, you know, those like cafes and porter cabins on the A roads and industrial estates. Yeah. So I felt like Tom had sort of taken a photo, signposting me to my secret dream life. Yeah. And that was the first poem that I wrote out of all of Tom's photos.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah, so that one was taken up in it's near the Merry Centre, Brierley Hill. Yeah. It's just on an industrial estate, and it just serves the units that are next to that cafe.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. Yeah.
The whole thing's handmade, and at one point I was only taking photographs with lettering in, so I was being quite strict to a method. But then, like Liz said, there are atmospheres around places as well. So not all my photographs have type or words or lettering in anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess that's where the Black Country type name came from, wasn't it? Because you're looking at sort of typefaces and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think what you're talking about there, both of you actually, is this sense of going with the flow a bit. You know, Tom, you see something and you think, there's something about this, and I can frame it and I can take a photograph of it. And Liz, you saw this and it meant something to you. But in a conversation that we've previously had, Tom has said that he's been quite surprised by some of the photographs that you've sort of taken under your poetic wing. What is it, apart from the Yam Yams one, what is it that you think that you look at these photographs and that's definitely something I can write about?
It's funny because it's really hard to articulate, but say sometimes Tom will send a batch of photos and I always have a good look through and I pretty much get a good sense straight away of which ones I'm curious about or I'd like to work with. So there was a beautiful one of like a derelict pub and a curtain blowing out the window like a wedding dress. I think they seem to sort of suggest a story to me.
It's that one, isn't it?
This one, yeah. I just think it just looks like a wedding dress blowing out the window, doesn't it? There's something about, like, sort of something terrible and brilliant and romantic about it. So I just kind of get a gut feeling about what I'm interested in. So normally it's the ones that seem to suggest a story or a bit of melancholy, and Tom doesn't give me any information about them, sometimes apart from just the place they were taken. So, you know, Brierley Hill or Monour Green or Willing Hall, that's all I get. It's just a photo and the location. But there's just something about it, I just get a gut feeling.
Yeah, I don't even give the date or a street name or anything, just the town. Sometimes they'd be titled, but that's just me giving it a file name often. But so I'll just pick something out in the photograph. But that's all Liz has got to go on, really. And
you don't do anything to these photos, do you, Tom? We don't touch them. There's no filters or anything like that. That blue sky is a Black Country blue sky.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, which actually gives it a really peculiar kind of beauty about it, this kind of brightness, which there is something about that in almost all of the photos that you've got. The colours are beautiful. Yeah,
I try if possible to choose a bright day because it just picks out all the detail and it shows things that you probably wouldn't notice on an overcast day. Seems obvious, really, but you know, I like it as stark as possible. And that one was taken in the winter, so that was a really cold day.
Yeah.
Some of them are taken on days like today. You know, it's boiling hot, but you know, people have said, you know, is it like the Caribbean where you live because the sky? It's not always the case.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. But the only thing I use is a phone. So I've currently got an iPhone 6 with a big split through the screen. So that's my technique.
There's no fancy equipment, no great big photograph, no great big cameras or anything like that.
No, I mean, I've talked to people about this before, and there's the idea that it's swinging around your neck when you're on your bike.
Yeah.
And I do go to some quite rough places to take photographs. So, you know, if I wanted to be a target for theft, then obviously that would be, you know, a stupid thing to do. So it's basically it's what I've got on me all the time. So, you know, it fits in your pocket well on your bike. I've often got music on. But part of the method really is just to find spots and then spend a bit of time with the place. And like Liz said, you know, it's not, if you think you're going to write a great poem every time you do it, you'll be disappointed. You know, there's a lot of photographs I take are just, well, that's just a photo of some bins, or, you know, that's not that doesn't work as a photograph. I've got loads of photos of bins. You know, they don't all work, but some just pop out straight away.
Yes, and it is as Liz said, is you know, you're probably going to take loads of photographs, as you've got to write loads of free writing in order to pick out what's good.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about this collaboration between the two of you then, please.
Well, yeah.
Go on, Tom.
Well, yeah, so Liz started drafting poems up and sharing them with me. And, you know, one thing, you know, you've just alluded to is I'm always surprised by what she chooses. So some things are big, I mean, this is just a detail on a wall. But obviously it caught my eye, and then Liz saw something to it that probably has storytelling potential. But we just started going backwards and forwards, didn't we? And then Liz thought that you should try them with a few journals and magazines, and we've been published in 2 journals now.
Yeah.
The Poetry Review, which, you know, is fantastic, and more recently Ambit. Again, they're poetry publications that deal with, they show artwork as well. Yeah. So you know, it's a great kind of meeting of 2 art forms really for me. And obviously poetry is not my area of knowledge, but I've always been interested in it and read it. But taking imagery into a different art form has been brilliant. Yeah.
Is there anything when you Tom, when you see or when you read a poem that Liz has written on the back of one of your photographs, is there any that you think, crikey, that's completely, you know, that is so different to anything that I thought she would write? Or are you usually, you know, well, actually, I can kind of see where she's coming from?
No, I'm normally really surprised.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like say Yam Yam's diner really, when I look at this image, I see through the window and all the rubbish in there. You know, and I didn't even notice that when I was taking the photograph, and a lot of photographs reveal things later on when you get back home, or you don't notice it when you're on the spot. You know, and I didn't actually go and see what the diner looked like, so I've got no idea what it looks like either, because it was all locked up.
Yeah.
But for Liz to go from this to write the story from you know, a first person perspective of their life working there, it's just a massive leap for me. And I think it's you know, that's what poetry can do, isn't it? It can transform one thing into another.
Yes, excellent. And in fact, while you've got Yam Yam's diner there, Liz, would you like to read us that poem?
Yeah, of course I will. Yeah, I think something that really interests me, like just generally as a writer, and especially writing about the Black Country and these kind of images, is finding like the feminine within those images. Often we think of the Black Country as a really masculine place, I guess, because it's to do with industry and heavy work. So I'm really interested in kind of the hidden side of it, the feminine energy within it, or the sort of the women's voices, or the transgressive voices that kind of weave themselves around that sort of that masculine vision of the Black Country that we always have. I like that sort of subversive power. So this is Yam Yam's diner. Somewhere beyond all this, I'm elbows down on the counter in Yam Yam's diner. sunflower oil slicking my ponytail, ruby t-shirt, blue apron, Our Lady of Perpetual Succour. All a hard-working man might stoop to kiss the knuckles of, stagger out in the diesel yellow morning, yearning to taste, serving a little chick and bab, tea slurry with sugar, bacon with a sly crisp of skin, bread thick as a dictionary flip to the entry, clam to jet. I'd love them, the men, in their overalls and boots you could stamp on the toes of, the tired ones, the trodden, the young, their chins still soft with bum fluff. I'd hold their dreams so tenderly, understanding that there is no heaven but this, a grease-spangled porter cabin, the rhyme the body yields when it's finally full. So get it whilst you can. By 3 I'll be gone. Tables wiped, shutters down, already feeling the afternoon sun on that soft, bare spot on my nape. The scent of fat and salt swinging like incense as I pull out the pins and let loose my hair.
Well done, Liz.
Yeah.
And as you say, you've got that real kind of feminine, sensual look at what we perceive, you know, to be a really masculine area. In fact, there's been a really good question here from Jodie Neville, and she's asking this. She says, has this collaboration changed your creative process? That's one. And then she says, Liz, do you look for more visual prompts in your poetry now? And Tom, do you think more about the stories that your photos could tell? So has it changed, has that collaboration changed the way that you go about your personal process? It's a good question, Jodie, that one.
Well, for me, there's only been one time before, really, when I've worked with another artist's work. When I wrote Black Country, I often used the paintings of George Shaw, which are of Tile Hill in Coventry. And I used to describe those paintings in using an image as being like a key in the lock to let yourself into the house of the poem, what you wanted to write about. Sometimes quite a difficult, complex or ambivalent feeling. An image can allow you in and then the poem takes off by itself. And that's something I've really found with Tom's work. It's sort of a way into sort of exploring this kind of something dark or a bit more ambivalent or complicated. So probably in that sense, it's kind of opened it up for me. But I always think with work or poems or writing that's based on artwork, it's got to bring something new to the image. It's no good if I just wrote a poem describing one of Tom's images, because actually you can just look at the photograph and it'd be about 100 times better. It has to bring another layer to it, open it up in a new way. And so I always try and set myself that challenge of, you can't just describe what you see, you have to bring something new to it. You know, you have to, add something to the image.
Yeah, that's good. That's lovely. And Tom, what about you? Now, thinking about, you know, this collaboration that you've had and future collaborations, which we'll talk about in a minute, does it change your process at all? Do you go around thinking, I bet Liz would like this?
Not really. I think what I've always done is took things direct. So if you notice a lot of my photographs, well, most of them they're straight on, and I'm quite interested in showing things as they are. But I am aware there's a storytelling element to them, and I can't quite pin down what it is. But I mean, this building here, if you see the whole thing, it's just in a field in Himley. I've got no idea how it got there, what it was for. But when I went past it, I just thought it was really interesting. And I think for me, if I find something interesting in these images, then hopefully Liz will.
Yeah.
It does, but like I said, it does surprise me the things she chooses. So, you know, so I will give her quite a lot to look at, but she'll hook something maybe from a photograph that I haven't noticed, and then that will be the launch point for a poem.
Yeah.
But what I wouldn't do is ride around thinking Liz will like this, because you'll end up having 10 photographs which are pretty much the same.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there is that sort of sense of you're blocking yourself then, aren't you, by just hoping that something.
Yeah, and it's variety of visuals as well, I think. So I'm aware that she's not going to like them all and write a poem about them all, because she'd have no time to do anything else. But it's giving her options and a palette to work with, really, I suppose.
Yeah. So I also noticed, Liz, you've got a Robert Perry picture behind your head.
Yeah. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Another famous black countryman who's an amazing artist, really. So you've got the publications you've already done, Poetry Review, Ambit, and so tell us now, what are you working together now? Have you got something that you're working on? You've obviously found the value of collaborative work really important. So what's next?
So we're working towards putting together a book of poems and photographs and archival material with a beautiful small independent press called Hercules Editions. They specialise in pairings of poets and artists of all different kinds. So all being well, next September, then we'll bring out a little book with them. It'll be a mix of Tom's photos, the poems that we've done for the project, and also bits of archival material as well that we sort of like to bring into other photographs, bits of maps, things that kind of conjure up this this territory of the Black Country that we're exploring.
That sounds good. I mean, it sounds like you've kind of hit upon a sort of a perfect match between the two of you, really, with this collaborative work. There is a lot of value in it where you're concerned. And clearly, you're working really well together. Is there any advice that you'd give to anyone who, an artist or a poet or a writer, about collaborative work, or how best to go about it, or pitfalls that you can sort of see ahead of time?
I'd say do it because it's incredibly joyful. Like, being a writer, especially a poet, can sometimes feel a really solitary business, and also it can feel quite pressured at times to create, great work. And when Tom and I met for the first time, we'd already been working together a bit, and I said, Tom, it feels amazing publishing photos and poems together, because it's like when you're working with someone, you've got someone else to lean on. Yeah. It's like they're kind of, you're sort of holding each other up, and they're giving you new ideas, and you can chat about things. So I think it feels like incredibly reviving and creative to work with another artist, especially across a different art form.
It is one thing, isn't it? Sorry, Tom. Sorry, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, for me, it's just like another layer to it, like an extra surprise as well. So I produce something which I think's a decent image, then I send it to Liz, and I've just got no idea what's going to come back. Yeah. So like the surprise element's brilliant.
And I think you're right.
It's always
with anything creative, if you don't have someone else there sometimes to tell you, you're doing really well. That's really quite good. Or actually, should we do it this way? You do get stuck. You don't know that you're stuck, do you? You don't know that you're stuck in a rut. So we've got this another collaborative thing going on when did you say, September?
It'll be next September.
September next year with Hercules.
Yeah.
Do we know a name for that project, or is that still?
No. So when we first published the poems in Poetry Review, they emailed me at the very last minute and said, "What's the title of your collaboration?" So, we haven't got one really. It felt like such a spontaneous process. Yeah. We hadn't even thought of a name for it, so we'll have to think of something good, Kerry.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. I'm terrible at that kind of stuff, so don't look at me. But I understand you've got some unpublished work, or that you'd like to please us with, to sort of virtually pretty much sort of finish up. I think there's one more question that's been flashed up, but is there something else you've got to read for us, Liz?
There is, and actually it's the poem that matches the slide that you can see at the moment, which is this, I think, really beautiful image of Monour Green. And all I know about it was taken at Monour Green. It looks to me, I don't know, perhaps a warehouse or something, but I loved the sky and that perfect match of the colours of the warehouse or the depot and the sky. And as soon as I looked at it, it just made me think, That's exactly what I imagined heaven would be like when I was a child. So that's where the poem came from. It's called Monour Green. When I was a lonely girl and still believed in heaven, it was this. The periwinkle sky over Monour Green, clouds scudding like breath, and so much soft air I'd be turned to alto stratas. I'd wake in the night, my unheld body glowing like foxfire, and dream I was lifted, holy lark, singing my song of inviolable love. Now I have you. I don't want that blue heaven. I want to enter the underworld through the dirt, rain drenching my bones. I want to disappear among the earthworms' blind courtship, the tiny black beetles winnowing the mulch. I want you to walk upon me, love. Smell me in the wild garlic and rotting blossom, the frothing cow parsley lining the cut. To push your fingers into wet soil and feel me printing your thumbs. When the alders are aflame and your heart clem-gutted, lie down in the unmade bed of the coppice and hear me sigh like I used to. There's nothing of ascension that I want now. I only want you and the children and the earth that holds us in its darkling heaven of consummation and rot.
Well done, Liz. Beautiful. And you just perform them so beautifully well. That question before about the performance poetry, it really does come across so beautifully. We've got one more, I think it's more, oh, there is a question for you, Tom, from Martin Killeen, who says, mesmerising sequence of photographs, doors, windows, walls, gates, fences. Do you find them or do they find you?
I think they find me, definitely. It's that feeling when I'm on my bike and I get drawn to places. Sounds a bit like I'm a bit, you know, like a human magnet, but there are these places where I think they're a bit worn down and battered, and I just come across them really. And like I said earlier, sometimes there's like a cluster of things in one place. But I'm definitely drawn to places, yeah. And windows, and I've got loads of photographs of windows that have been bricked up, so I don't want to be psychoanalyzed or anything, but
No. No, that line. No, it's fine. But I mean, the photographs that you take are sort of they're industrial photographs, aren't they? You know, there is this sense of kind of urban, as you say, this kind of urban grime about them. That does have quite a lot of humour, but often, as Liz says, you know, it's got also quite a lot of sort of real sensuality about them, and the real stories that there are kind of lend themselves to any kind of creative writing, I think, that comes from it. But poetry seems to work really, really brilliantly. So we're looking forward then to this future collaboration. And can people get hold still of the poetry review? And I did, by the way, from Ambit. Yeah, they can still get it, can't they, online?
Oh yeah. Ambit and Poetry Review have got their own websites and Instagram accounts. They're on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how about exhibitions? Did you mention something about an exhibition very quickly?
Long term, we're working towards the idea of exhibiting the photographs next to the poems, and I've got some ideas around maybe working with people who are either calligraphers or graphic designers who can interpret maybe some of the letter forms in the photographs and then render Liz's words with that kind of new typography maybe. So they could maybe take something from a photograph like this for one poem, or just transpose letter forms from other places. But the idea is that we'll do a joint exhibition at some point, yes. Good.
There is just one more question, it's quite a long one, from David Solar, who wants to thank you very much, loves all the work. As you work on presenting your collaborations, how do you think about the differences in how poems and image might be consumed on the page? For example, when it appeared in magazines and hopefully in a future book, as a live event with readings and as an installation? I think you probably just kind of answered that one. What he was getting at is, in particular, how do you accommodate the time a reader takes to read the poem versus reading the photograph versus thinking about the combination and dialogue between the both? I mean, that's a long and complicated question, isn't it? Do you think that deeply about it, or does it just come out?
We did think about the way they're presented in the journals quite carefully. We were sent drafts, and we weren't over fussed with one particular magazine. The way it was presented wasn't in keeping with how we thought about it. But in print format, then you've got that time to let your eyes move backwards and forwards, haven't you? Yeah. I don't know what Liz thinks about that, but it wasn't as straightforward as having a photograph and putting just general words. It's a bit more complicated than that.
I think poems happen slowly for people. So you might read a poem through really quickly first, the same way you might look at an image quickly or a painting quickly. But then you go back to it again and again. I think people that love poems never would read a poem just once. Same as people that love a photograph would never look at it and think, right, that's it, I've seen it. We're always returning to both of those art forms to find new things and to bring our own feelings and interpretations to it. That's why I think books and exhibitions, and I know another poet that worked with a photographer and the work was behind her when she was reading. And actually, it sort of brings something else to it, that sort of moving of the attention between the two things.
Yeah. Well, you know, once this whole lockdown is over, there's all sorts of ways showing your collaboration off. Isn't that the truth? I'm sure there'd be plenty of people that'd be really interested to see it.
But somebody approached me with the idea of a short film. So you'd have the images either static or, you know, go back to the places and just film footage. Yeah. Same sort of shot, but on film, and then perhaps with Liz reading over the top. So you've got like a audio visual record of it. But
great.
We haven't spoken to our lawyers yet about that.
Well, they might be here. You never know.
Yeah. I think an exhibition is a different thing still, because it's a place where the photographs look different when they're on a larger scale. Yeah. But the detail that I saw when I was on the spot there emerges a lot more. And then if you've got the words next to it, you could spend a lot of time, and people like to spend a long time in galleries, so it could work really well. And if you present it in a way that they're easy to photograph, people could take that away with them, and look at it in their own time. So you don't always take everything in straight away, do you?
No, you don't. And that's exactly what Liz said, isn't it? You know, you rarely just look at it and think, oh, I've seen that now, then. Unless it's really rubbish, of course, then you just go. But there is a sense, isn't there, that you kind of, it's embossed somewhere so that you can return to it and remember what you saw sometimes. But look, I mean, we could talk for another hour, actually, couldn't we? But we probably need to stop now and say thank you very much to Tom Hicks, who Black Country typed with his amazing photographs, and the lovely Liz Berry with her wonderful readings of those poems. We're really highly honoured, especially to hear the unpublished one. So thank you very much, both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Claire, would you like to?
Yeah, thanks very much, Kerry. That was brilliant. I got quite emotional then with that poem. So it's a good job he didn't go straight to me after that. So yeah, huge thank you to Liz and Tom and to Kerry for hosting such a fantastic hour. I just want to let everybody know before you go, the next ArtsFest Online event will be on Wednesday the 1st of July, featuring artist Dean Kelland in conversation with James Latunji Cockbill from Icon Gallery Birmingham. This can be booked via Eventbrite. So thanks very much for watching. See you soon.
Thank you.